All right, check this out. So ICE detained a U.S. citizen in Northern Virginia with guns drawn. He offered to show ID and told the officers he was an American citizen, but they handcuffed him anyway. The man is a Trump voter, but says he is reconsidering his support after he was targeted for being Hispanic. First of all, really, dude, you're Hispanic and you still voted for Trump? But even beyond that, this was tweeted out by Representative Don Beyer of Virginia, but this isn't even a Virginia problem. It's not even a Democrat or Republican problem. This is a problem for every single American, no matter your state, no matter your party. It's not just a problem in Virginia. I live in Chicago, and this just happened right next to me. There are a lot of scary stories that have been popping up like this, and I want to tell you guys about what we can do. I want to tell you guys about what happened in Chicago right next to me and broader updates on this situation. Because, of course, the main story sweeping the nation right now is the Trump administration admitting it mistakenly deported a Salvadorian migrant to this super prison that is dangerous and terrifying, and this dude had no due process, no chance to defend himself, and all of these stories should chill you because the government should not be able to decide on a whim that somebody who looks like they might not belong doesn't deserve constitutional protections, that you don't deserve due process just because you're slightly brown or because you have certain tattoos. There are even reports that people wearing Bulls merch were picked up off the streets. I mean, hey, you know how many immigrants there are in Chicago? It's just incredibly chilling and terrifying. And let's go to what's currently happening. I mean, right here, Trump is unloading on Judge Boasberg really quickly. But I feel like Judge Boasberg is the most vindicated person of like the century. Boasberg was a judge a few weeks ago who Trump was attacking because he was like, dude, you cannot just deport plane loads of immigrants with no due process. Boasberg actually said you have to turn these planes around and make sure that there is due process before you do this. Trump freaked out. Republicans didn't understand why it was important, but now they're starting to realize maybe it would have been easier to just comply with that court order. But let me read this. This happened right next to me in Chicago, in the area. Julio Noriega is 54 years old and was born in Chicago and is a U.S. citizen. On January 31st, he was walking near the corner of Cermak Road and Harlem Avenue in Illinois, handing out his resume to a local business. As he walked out of a Jiffy Lube, he was approached by ICE officers who grabbed and handcuffed him and put him into a van without an opportunity to explain his citizenship. Dude, it's the same pattern that I just read in this story right here. They handcuff him. They try to take you away. They essentially kidnap you before you have any chance to confirm your identity or prove your citizenship. They're not even showing a warrant. They're not even reading your Miranda rights anymore. They just cuff you and throw you into a van. And this is the crazy part. This is the scary part. All the while, Julio had a wallet containing identification that ICE had confiscated. The officers never showed Julio a warrant, and they did not ask any questions to ascertain whether he was a non-citizen or a flight risk. After about 10 hours, ICE officers reviewed the contents of Julio's wallet and realized he was a U.S. citizen, then released him with no money and no paperwork whatsoever. And I think the scarier part of this is, when I began to read more and more about this story, after they cuffed him and threw him into a van, he was driven around in circles and held for hours while he pleaded and said, dude, I'm a citizen. There's no reason to do this. Okay, but this is where it gets even worse. I then was doing more research and stumbled across this article. Immigration agents arrested a U.S. citizen. We know that part. They've been doing that a lot now. But then they created warrants after the arrest. Lawyers say in court. Chicago attorneys visited federal court a few weeks back and accused federal agents of violating immigration law and the constitutional rights of at least 22 people since January in Chicago alone. This is happening right next to me. Chicago attorneys with the National Immigrant Justice Center and the ACLU of Illinois accused the federal government in court Thursday of violating immigration law and the constitutional rights of at least 22 people. 2 people are still in custody, 19 were released on bond, and 1 has already been deported. And since then, I mean, this article was written on March 15th, but since then, imagine how many people have had their lives ruined or have been deported without due process. I could keep visiting the story that is in the headlines right now, the administrative error, but I'm sure I'm going to be making a lot more videos about that over the next days. But this is what it's called: extrajudicial detention. Again, extrajudicial detention is unconstitutional. It's un-American, and that is what has been happening. Because there are a few things going on. So while these extrajudicial detentions are going on, the Trump admin has been intentionally taking a wrecking ball to the concept of due process. It's been a pattern. Deportations based on tattoos or clothing or anonymous tips with no warrants and no hearings. So they kind of combine. After you do these extrajudicial detentions and you detain someone and take them away with no reason, you can then deport them with no due process. And I think we're beginning to see the true repercussions of that happening as the Trump admin faces massive, massive blowback for their mistaken deportation. Just insane words. Mistakenly deported somebody. Imagine that. A father of three who has a disabled kid was mistakenly deported. If you went back a year in time and you asked me, Adam, if the Trump administration wins, or if Trump gets into office and he begins deporting people en masse, do you think there will be mistakes? And I would say, yes. This was a talking point I used in debates at Trump rallies. If you've been watching me for a while, I've been to like 40 to 50 Trump rallies, and I would ask the supporters, how do you do mass deportations without tanking the economy, without accidentally deporting American citizens, or without violence in the streets? And I mean, dude, now we see American citizens being detained with no due process, not even being reading a warrant. I bet you in due time, an American citizen will be ending up in a super prison. I can almost bet you in due time, if the Trump admin is not careful, there will be an American citizen who ends up in a super prison in El Salvador, which is a terrifying thought because it could be you or I. If they're really just arresting people based off of skin color, which they absolutely are, and they're not allowing these people to prove their citizenship, then yeah, it's insane. So attorneys say these actions violate the Nava settlement, which is a 2018 class action lawsuit who filed in response to unlawful arrests by ICE agents. Funny, the last time that this had to be challenged in court was during Trump's first admin. Quote, no one disputes that ICE has authority to do immigration enforcement in the US or Chicago or anywhere, but they only have authority to do it under the laws that Congress have passed or are part of the legal limitations of the US Constitution. Fleming says the rhetoric of mass deportation is putting a lot of pressure on federal immigration officers to get their detention numbers up, and that's why there's all this sloppiness. Not only, I'm not even going to call it mistakes. It's just wild. Like, check this out. In another case, Ortega was detained outside his home without a warrant. In his statement, Ortega, who's 47, said an agent who identified as a police officer approached his car and asked to see a driver's license. He was arrested shortly after showing a temporary visitor's driver's license, which is given to non-citizens in Illinois. Instead of releasing him, they allegedly kept him in the back of a vehicle for hours in the same way, and then he was detained at a city-county jail in Indiana for about a month. Quote, federal agents have seemingly developed a pattern or practice of trying to evade the Nava settlements by arresting people with, quote, unquote, administrative warrants that they are creating in the field as they've already had the person detained. So that means that after they detain someone, they then create a warrant. Post hoc, they develop a warrant and act like that's why the person was detained, which is slippery, scary, illegal, and should chill every single American citizen. Because if you walk on the sidewalks, if you walk the streets of America, you could be picked up on your way to work or whatever the hell. This is also where Habeas corpus comes in, which is one of the oldest and most sacred principles in American law. It's the idea that if the government does detain you on the side of the street, you have a right to appear before a judge and demand a lawful reason for your attention before they take any next steps. Without habeas, there is no limit on what the government can do to you, and the framers of our Constitution understood this. You can criticize them for a lot of things that happened 250 years ago, but they understood a lot about what could possibly happen in an authoritarian country, and now we're seeing this all come to fruition. So I'll leave it at that. All that I ask from you is that if you made it this far, drop some blue hearts, say hi, Adam, drop a like, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.